be more, what is that? Because the time is very limited and we have a very prominent persons here, and I don't want to take the time. I'll introduce you one by one about the presenters and also the discussants. They are all professors, they are all expert in the labor economics. The first one that would like to make a presentation maybe Edimon atau Pak Kris dulu. Professor Christopher Manning. This is the order. He's a professor from Australian National University. And I'll introduce you with Professor Chris Manning. Professor Chris Manning is actually staying at Jalan Kusuma Negara. And he's now staying at Monash, that's in Melbourne. And his wife is from Yogyakarta. Professor Christopher Manning is Honorary Associate Professor of the Arndt-Corden Department of Economics, Australian National University, and education is from ANU, and master degree from Monash University, if I'm mistaken, yeah, long time ago. And previous work experience, I think, is the former head of the ANU Indonesia project, 1998 until 2010. This is very well-known Indonesian project. It is something like a forum. It is gathering Indonesian and also Australian economists and making some seminars or forums at ANU. Second is Dr. Edimon Ginting. Current occupation is the Directors, Economic Analysis and Operational Support Division and ASEAN Development Bank, and the head office since 2007 until now. Education is from Monash University, like Pak Chris Manning, like myself at that time. Of course, Pak Edimon graduated from our faculty. He was in Department of Economics. Economics, that's in my batch. That's my close friend. That's why he's here. And the third presenters will be Dr. Kiyoshi Taniguchi. He is a senior economist at Edimon area, Economic Analysis and Operational Support Division, Asian Development Bank. His master degree and Ph.D. from Ohio State University. And bachelor with honors from University of Oregon. It's a very good university, and previous work experience in Economist at United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And I think I welcome you to come here, sitting next to me, Pak Chris, Pak Edimon. And we are going to talk about this book here. This is a new book from ASEAN Development Bank. The title is Indonesia Enhancing Productivity Through Quality Job. This is a very good book. They gave me one. I'm lucky that you are given one book or not? Tender? Tidak ya? Nanti minta aja buat mereka. Nanti boleh punya saya. Atau saya kasih apanya? PDF-nya. PDF-nya I'll send it to you. If you know my WhatsApp, then I'll send it to you. The core, what is that? The core seminars is talking about labor economics. That's why we would like to have a discussion from the prominent person, Hanie from Department of Economics, Professor Kusnanto from Faculty of Medicine, and also Evita from Faculty of Geography. The substance for this book is talking about what will be the future labor market that will be existing for Indonesia, because of now the interaction between labor market and also the new technology, the digitalization is very much likely merging. Then the enhancement in terms of digitalization in the labor market as well as in education is needed. That's why university, I think, has to prepare for everything related to the improvement in terms of the digitalization. because everything is digitalized now. Digital bank, digital money, of course digital labor market at the time. And now we have something like what we call it, the big data analytics. That's happening in the labor market now, and it is very important. And we need something like specialization. There is a job loss, there is a job which is expired already, something like post office, clerical jobs, and there is something like job gains. There is a new emerge, what is a type of jobs that is in the labor market. And talking about the macroeconomy in Indonesia, it is about something, the growth is 5%, and the need for the growth for absorbing the production of the labor is actually, we are needing something like 6%, because every 1% of the economic growth is compatible to 500 at the maximum numbers of 500,000 numbers of labor. That's why if we grow only 5%, then we have to absorb about 2,500,000 people, the new job seekers. Although the production of the labor in Indonesia for each year is about 3 million people. That's why at the minimum we need something like 6% economic growth. I think they are the expert. They will tell us about what will be the futures of the labor market, what is the books is about. I think the first presenter, Professor Chris Manning, would have to make a presentation for maybe 10, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, it's up to you.
Terima kasih sekali Pak Edhie. Honored discussants, friends, colleagues, and all the audience, students, and all the other audience. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be back at Jogja and Gajah Mada to talk about this important book. My job in this presentation is to talk a little bit about the overall labour supply and labour demand situation in Indonesia. And then Pak Edimon and Pak Kiyoshi will talk about some of the specific policy issues. I should mention that the chapter that I've written is a joint chapter with Dr. Devanto Pratomo from Brawijaya University. We did two chapters for the book, one on labour supply and attachment to the workforce, and one on jobs, wages and labour market segmentation. The book really deals with Indonesia now, not Indonesia in the future. But we are very conscious that there is a rapid change in technology, in systems of communication that is radically going to change the labour market. So we're very conscious of these changes, but we're not quite sure where they're going. So hopefully we'll get some suggestions from the floor and from the discussants, and we will make some suggestions as well. But the main content of our presentation is about the labour market as we see it. What I call the old issues are central to the discussion. And what are the old issues? Things like the demographic dividend, maybe you've heard of that. Things like high rates of unemployment in Indonesia. Things like a depressing performance of the manufacturing sector and employment and jobs. These are issues that have been fundamental to the Indonesian labour market for quite a long time. But we are very conscious that there are new issues with the digital divide, the digital revolution and the internet-driven services that are emerging and determining jobs, determining the outcomes in the labour market. Consumer demand, you can go out now and order any consumer item you like through the large consumer internet companies. And so we think there's a new paradigm emerging. There's a paradigm in which Indonesia now has will increasingly have an internet-based economy, have a digital economy. That's the future. We have the past. That past is to do with the big supply of labour that is in the rural areas, that is trying to participate in this new economy. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. The old paradigm was formal sector and informal sector. That no longer is true. The informal sector is also involved in the digital divide. Some of the formal sector are not involved in the digital economy. So we have a mixing up of the old formal and informal sector categories. So I mentioned that. We deal with the formal and informal sector quite a lot in this book, but we're recognizing now that we have to think again about these categories. They are not so relevant anymore because everyone has to be part of the digital economy. So now I want to start and talk a little bit about the supply side of the economy, what I call the supply side as a labour economist. That is the growth of the population, labour force, the quality of the labour force participation. These are issues to do with what we call labour supply. And there are three main sets of messages we want to talk about. The first is to do with population growth and distribution. Indonesia's labour force and working age population has been growing very fast, quite fast by international standards. But at the same time, as represented by many of you here, Indonesia is benefiting from a demographic dividend. The younger age population is dominating the workforce, new entrants into the workforce. Many of you young people here are part of that demographic dividend. So there are two opposing forces, and the slides on slide 5 indicates on the left-hand side indicates the decline in the what's called the dependency ratio and the rise in the old age population, and eventually about 2030 the demographic dividend will end. The older population will begin to dominate. The dynamism that many of you are providing to the workforce will become less important. So that's one dimension. On the other side, we have the issue of a rapidly growing workforce. The demographic dividend also implies a rapid increase in the workforce and the need to provide jobs. And Indonesia's workforce is growing quite fast by Southeast Asian standards. There are issues of population mobility associated with the population growth, and particularly commuting and circular migration, movement into the cities. So the dynamism of Jabodetabek, of the greater Jogja area, the greater Solo area, is very much influenced by the movement of people from the villages, from nearby villages. I think probably the population of Jogja grows by about 25%, 30% every day because of movement people from Bantu, from Sleman, from other parts of Yogyakarta. Edimon will talk a little bit more about some of these issues. Oh yes, especially about Sleman. He's a professor of Sleman, actually. The second issue on the labour, what I call the labour supply side, is the issue of participation rates in the workforce. That is, how many people of the working age population are participating in the workforce. And one of the key issues there is female participation rates. That's what varies most across countries, the female participation rate. And one of the challenges in Indonesia has been stagnation in overall female participation rates over the last 10 to 15 years. A second issue on the labour force participation side are high rates of unemployment amongst young people. Hopefully all of you will get jobs very soon when you graduate, but on average young Indonesian graduates take about 12 months to get into the workforce. That's a very long time, and it's a waste of resources, actually. And some of those relationships are shown in the figures above on the left-hand side. Really very little increase in the female participation rate over the last 10 years, 15 years. And on the right-hand side, the high rates of unemployment in Indonesia compared with other Southeast Asian countries. The third set of issues to do with the labour supply that are very important are international migration issues. This has brought many benefits to Indonesia, but also a lot of pain. And I think you will have followed the recent case in Malaysia as one example of some of the difficulties that Indonesian migrant workers face abroad. Government has tried to slow down the rate of migration of unskilled people and has been successful. But the undocumented workers, many that are not approved by the government, may have increased. And the figure here on the left-hand side indicates that the blue bars indicate the decline in the number of working people, of people going abroad, but at the same time remittances have gone up. The money that's been sent in has increased, and that suggests that probably undocumented migration has increased. People find ways of illegally going abroad without the right visa and approvals. Now, what are the policy issues that we think are important in this field? First of all, we feel that it's important that Indonesia continues to support the family planning program, because that feeds into the population, the working age population, and will slow down the growth of the population, of the working population, put less strain on the labour market, provide more opportunities for people to move quickly into jobs. For female participation rate, the big issue is less educated women, in particular high school graduates in rural areas and in urban areas that are not participating in the workforce. For the unemployment rate, perhaps the most important issue is labour market exchanges, local labour market exchanges. They're very effective in some countries, including the Philippines, actually, where Edimon lives, at the local level. Indonesia doesn't have that tradition. It needs to develop, in our view, more. And finally, for migration, better conditions for migrant workers and support for the skills of migrant workers so they don't have to go abroad. And if they do go abroad, they are more mobile. They have more opportunity, if they have a bad employer, to move to another job. So these are what we call the labour supply issues. I'll move very quickly now to the labour demand side, that is the growth of the economy and how that affects employment. The first set of issues are to do with structural change in the labour market. Indonesia has gone through quite a significant increase in the service sector. That's part of the digital economy that's grown so fast. That's one set of issues, partly associated with urbanization. The big disappointment has been manufacturing for jobs. The manufacturing sector industry has not been very successful in providing jobs. The graph here shows that around about 2005, 2006, the service sector began to grow quite fast in terms of the share and size of employment. The agriculture sector, the employment in agriculture began to decline. And Edimon will also talk about some of these issues that are covered in chapter 4 of the book. The blue line on the figure behind me indicates the stagnation in the share of employment in manufacturing. That was once the dynamic force for employment and income growth in East Asian economies. That's not true in Indonesia now, and we don't think it will be true in the future. So the digital economy needs to be able to absorb many of the job seekers that would have gone into manufacturing in 10, 15, 20 years ago. The second set of issues I'd like to talk about, if we could, to do with segmented labour markets, what I call segmented labour markets. And one issue is to do with the different rate of wages increases, so in different parts of the economy. And the figure on the left-hand side suggests that the wages in hotels, in manufacturing, in mining, have all begun to increase quite quickly in recent times, from around 2009, since the global crisis. But wages in small-scale industry have stagnated. So we have a dualism in the labour market emerging. Small-scale industry wages have not increased very much, as shown by the orange line at the bottom. The low level of productivity and the concentration of less educated workers in this sector has been a major problem. So now I want to turn to some of the policies on the labour demand side. The first set of issues is really to do with providing more systematic support for job creation in manufacturing, in labour-intensive industries. I believe that still has a role to play, but also supporting the spread of the digital economy into the small-scale sector to raise productivity and to raise opportunities. A second set of issues is really just to raise the overall rate of growth from 5% to 6%, for example. And both of those policies could increase employment by around about 500,000 jobs in the future. So we suggest some ways in which this might be achieved. So those are issues to do with the quantity of jobs. Dr. Kiyoshi will talk later on about some of the issues to do with the quality of jobs. But very briefly, they're to do with private enterprise engagement with vocational schools and with polytechnics, provision of a training fund, and other policies to raise the skill level of the workforce. There are some other policies that are also important, looking for ways to improve the small-scale credit to small enterprises, and that is very important in terms of closing the gap in wages that we saw earlier. And final set of policies are to reduce the disincentives for firms to employ permanent workers. We find that many firms, many companies are not employing permanent workers. There's a lot of casual employment. Now, chapter 7 of our book talks about some of the labour policies. And if I can just stand up while I'm talking about this, because I don't have a printout. 3 sets of policies are dealt with in the book in Chapter 7. Wage policies and labour law issues, coverage of legislation and collective bargaining, and some policy recommendations about how labour policies, the policies that the Ministry of Manpower makes, can help improve opportunity and jobs. So first to wage policies and labour law issues. There are 2 sets of issues really. One is the new minimum wage policies that began in 2014, law number 78 in 2015, that provides certainty for minimum wages, but much slower increases in minimum wages than in the past. And it does seem this has been a successful policy. I know that the trade unions, some trade unions do not like it, but for business it provides certainty, for government it provides certainty, and for many workers it does too. And it seems, if you look on the right-hand side, in 2016, there's been some improvement in the distribution of wages, the Gini index of wages over time. In regard to the labour law, the issue for a long time has been very high rates of severance in Indonesia. That is, if a worker is dismissed, firms have to pay make a payout, a gratuity, and a payment to workers, and that's very high in Indonesia, and it's made it difficult for firms to employ workers on a permanent basis. That still remains an issue. I know the government is now considering unemployment insurance as a possibility, a way around this law, but it has been an issue for employment. Moving on. Now, one of the problems, of course, in a labour market that's so diverse as Indonesia, is that the coverage of legislation is relatively weak, and collective bargaining is weak. So we talk a little bit about those issues. Workers on permanent contracts only make up about 21% of the employed population. Very small, and that means that the number of workers that are receiving regular training, for example, is very small. People who are on oral contracts or fixed-term contracts receive relatively little training, so the skills are not developed, and we can take that back really to some of the inflexibility in the labour law. Number of micro and small enterprises. Most of those are informal and are not affected by labour legislation. And that's true also of the micro and small firms in the manufacturing sector. Next one. Non-compliance with the minimum wage is very high. So not that many firms actually, small-scale firms, pay the minimum wages, and that's well documented now. And in addition, not many workers receive Social Security. So these are the issues to do with the labour market that is what we might call segmented or dualistic in its structure. Finally, one of the issues has been there's been too much dependence on the legislation and not enough dependence on collective bargaining in setting standards. And the number of firms that are unionised, the number of workers that are unionised, only about 18% in Indonesia. That's a very low level of unionisation. And as a consequence, collective bargaining is relatively limited. So what are the policy recommendations? A review of government regulations is really needed, and that's a very difficult policy issue, but it's something we believe that's important. Collective bargaining really does need to be strengthened. That's that's the rock on which the standards of workers can be improved, and that's what happened in many other countries such as Korea and Taiwan when they developed. There also needs to be a reinforcement of compliance to labour standards and rights, partly related to the improvement in collective bargaining. And finally, workers on non-standard rights need to be, there needs to be a special set of legislation for them for protection. At present, people on fixed-term contracts are not well protected by the legislation, and Emma Allen has suggested in her chapter that this needs to be looked at. So those are the issues that we've looked at the labour supply and labour demand side. Thank you very much, Pat. I hope this helps provide a platform for our discussion of specific issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Christopher Melling. It's very interesting presentation, telling us about the limited inflexibility in our labor market. The second, Edimon. Second is Pak Edimon. Berapa menit kira-kira? 5 menit. 15 menit.
To increase my productivity, let me just stand up. Although I already stand up when I was sitting down. I will be, I think Pak Chris already highlighted to you the challenge of creating jobs in the past. My presentation will kind of give you a portrait of one of the biggest employers in Indonesia, which is the agriculture sector. Okay, 30% of our laborers are still in agriculture. So we will give you some highlight on agriculture. Okay, I think what happened to people like me and you very often, we look at numbers of economic growth more often than employment, okay? But if you look at the two together here, you can see that the change of structure in our output is much faster than the change of structure in our employment. Okay, the number here, you can see that in the share of GDP, for example, in agriculture, the share of output is only 13%. But employment in the sector is still 34%, just a few years back. So basically you can see that the change of output seems to be faster than the change of employment. I think this is one thing that we need to see. We were good already in terms of reducing poverty, but if you look at our poverty, really, there are still a lot in agriculture. So for us, there were two objectives in terms of doing this goal. One is we were motivated by equality. Inequality is increasing in Indonesia over the last 10 years because of high growth from commodity. But at the same time, we also face the new challenge in terms of industry and so on, Industry 4.0 and so on. How do you then get the balance between our old problem and the new challenge? So this is basically, so now we look at the agriculture sector. Here is one fact in agriculture sector. If you start to work in agriculture sector, you most likely will stuck there. It's very difficult to get out. Okay? This is a number shape. If you look at people all over time, if they start with agriculture, most likely it's very difficult to get out. And also, if you look at the structure of employment there, actually, many of them are getting older. Yeah, and entry to the sector is actually declining now. Okay, because of that, many people now are not entering that sector anymore. The entry to the sector is also declining. Another important thing, I guess, is the transformations in agriculture, as you can see here, yeah, in rural sector. Agriculture is still the biggest employer in rural. Yeah? This is some of the important fact. What if you were, one way to improve productivity is that, I think there are two ways to improve productivity of agriculture. One is to get some of them who are excessive out of the sector. Okay. Secondly, we also need to improve productivity for those who stay in agriculture. But now the question, if you look at those who get out, what are the characteristics? Two things that are important in terms of getting them out. One is education. Okay, so when Kiyoshi later talk about education is important everywhere. And you will see also, education is key in terms of adjusting towards Industry 4.0. We will talk a bit later towards the end of my talk. Secondly, if you are in rural area, but you had a second job, it also facilitate you coming out of the sector. Okay. So those are, and obviously another important thing is mechanization. If mechanization is involved in the rural area, then also helps them to get out. So this is one thing, yeah. But you own land, okay. It is also negative here. Doesn't really help in a way. But if you are married, this also doesn't help. Okay, so if you're married in the village, it doesn't help you getting out of the sector. So, what are the key messages there? Then, in terms of agriculture sector, I think if we are often talking about diversification, but economy as a whole, we want to diversify the economy, and a lot of it are talking about diversifications outside of the rural area. But here, if we really want to improve productivity in agriculture, we also need to diversify the rural area. That's one key message here. So these are some of the characteristics of those who can get out. Yeah, I think, for example, if you are going to urban farm, you need to have at least secondary school, and there's some kind of mechanization, and so on. Those are the characteristics. But if your first job is actually agriculture sector, it's difficult to get out. The key finding, and this is the summary of the key finding. Okay, the key message, as I said to you before, starting in agriculture will make it difficult to get out. And then, here are the push factor that will get you out: having a second job, owning a land, a plantation expansion, and also, some other thing that will get you out in terms of mechanization. Okay. So, as I said to you, I think this is important for Indonesia, given that 30% of our people are still there. These are the recommendations I already mentioned briefly. Now, one thing to improve people who stay there actually is this. Many people, many farmers actually encouraged to grow staple food like rice and so on, where, in my view, is not really helping their productivity. But if you diversify them even to horticulture and so on, non-staple food, that's one quick way of improving the productivity. There seems to be something wrong in terms of our definitions of food security, where we identify food security with rice and so on. But look at the young generation now. I think they are consuming less rice. They're moving to other kind of foods. So those are something that we need to pay attention in the future. Yeah. Okay. The next slide is about urbanization. Why urbanization is important? I think the agriculture was kind of a traditional part of the economy. It is still there. It's our problem, and we need to solve it if we were to be productive, because 30% of our people are still there. The urban is the new sector of the economy. This is the meeting point between our infrastructure. We build infrastructure there more than anywhere else, and our educated people staying there, and also the better service sector, better education, better other issues. And also, more importantly, I guess, in many places, better governed. Okay? And there is a trend these days that, in developing, and as a result, you can see, if you look at our economy, Indonesia is growing around 5-6% in the last 10 years or so. But many of these smaller cities like Bandung, like Makassar, like Solo, the secondary city they call it, they're actually growing faster. Say, Bandung is growing close to 8%, Makassar is growing up above 8%. So those are the new center to create productivity. Right? This is why we look at urban. And more importantly, Indonesia will be urbanizing fast down the line. We have urbanized fast in the past, but it will be even faster down the line. And again, if you talk about Industry 4.0, this is the place. This is going to be where it happened. It may happen in agriculture in terms of cutting some of those value chains, making them more efficient and so on. But I think a lot of the change because of Industry 4.0 is going to happen in the urban sector. I think, so here you see there is a positive correlation between education and productivity in the urban sector. But one important thing to look at is that there's also a negative problem associated with urbanization. Okay, if it is getting too big, you also end up with some of those negative characteristics, and that's actually affecting productivity in Indonesia. We found that although there's positive correlation between educated workers staying in the urban and growth and so on, it turned out that this productivity gain is actually bigger when you are staying in the in smaller city. Yeah? So, which will, the reason why that happened because the way we urbanize, okay, like Jakarta for example, I think in the past we start with the center. That's where where the growth starts, and then the place above, below, outside of it is actually not very developed, and then there's another center of growth somewhere else, which not that well connected. Yeah, so that actually creates some of the problem that earlier we mentioned. That doesn't produce a lot of optimal growth. What happened now, I think the tendency that people try to go learning from this actually finding the nexus, finding the nexus between good governance of the city and industrialize them where you can, infrastructure and education. You put them together in much more sustainable way. That is a better way of growing productivity. Obviously, it's there also where you adopt technology a lot faster. Okay, this is actually one of the next growth that will come in Indonesia. I think this is where we should pay our attention. But at the same time, I was a farmer boy when I was small. I think don't forget agriculture because they are still there and large. Okay, let me just go fast here because it's not very. Okay, this is another way of urbanizing, which I think which characterize what I was saying. Looking at the nexus between good governance, better education, and then more sustainable, and also at the same time, avoid some of the characteristics of non-sustainable city, where you have better connections, surrounded by closer workers, and so on. As a result, you end up with much more productive city. And you see that actually in Indonesia, if you compare the big and smaller city. But obviously, even Indonesia, Makassar and Bandung wasn't planned to be that way. they happen to be just smaller, and then you can see some of its characteristics of smaller city to be better in terms of productivity. But down the line, I think when we develop a city, it needs to be planned in such a way to support productivity. Okay, this is just to highlight the characteristics of Makassar and Bandung I was telling you. If you look at productivity of cities in Indonesia, I think they are among the most productive ones. I think this is annual growth productivity in Bandung, Makassar, for example, 6.3%, 5.4%, and so on. Okay? Okay, I think that is the presentations about. This is the key message. I think we can have strong productivity gain through urbanization. Okay, if if we avoid some of those negative characteristics of cities. But it turns out that here in Indonesia, I think the smaller cities, even Kabupaten is more productive than the bigger one. And therefore, down the line, when we will be urbanizing anyway, so in that case, we have to be more anticipative, more proactive, less reactive in terms of dividing the urbanization issue. Let me mention a bit about the industry 4.0 because Edhie was mentioning that. I think during our launch in Jakarta, I think we had a number of speakers speaking about it. I think it's coming. It's no doubt that the way the economy going down the line will be affected a lot by that. So even Bangladesh, the country that are producing garments, start using robots. I think, so it may come here. It will come, but there are a number of sectors that will be affected quickly. One is governance. Delivering public service will be cheaper. It will be more efficient. Education and so on. I think that is a positive sign. Okay. Banking sector will also be, with a lot of these easier way of identifying people and so on. Access to finance will be easier. But at the same time, many of the works that we have now may not be there anymore. Okay, there will be less work in manufacturing, perhaps. There will be less work here and there. But what is our role? I think how do we deal with it? The latest report by McKinsey, basically, I think will also be reflected in our next report in ADB, which will be out in April. Basically says, okay, the leader of this is going to be obviously private sector. Private sector will take the lead in terms of absorbing the technology. But who will be the next stakeholders, the most important one? It is actually the university. It's actually the scientists, the people like us here, to provide talents, to absorb those. I think, so university is going to be important. But at the same time, the role of government is to facilitate and manage some of the risks that are associated with it. Because there will be adjustment. I think the government will need to manage those adjustments accordingly to maximize some of the benefit that will be brought by this industry 4.0. I think with that, let me just finish my presentation, and then I will give the floor to Kiyoshi. Thank you very much.
I will touch on the education, the skills and labor chapter. I just want to start with the question. Among Indonesian workers, how many percentage of workers who has a university degree or above? So the question is, if you see 100 Indonesian workers, how many workers have a university degree? What do you think?
10%.
Oh, good. So our statistic shows 9%. So it's close enough. But this is how much you are privileged. So the vast majority of your colleagues, your countrymen, the people do not come to college. You are all on the way to top 10%, top 9% of this labor market. And then many of you will be a leader in the private sector and then the public sector. And then some of you will be policy makers. And the biggest question of this education is, it's not much of like education is important or not. Everybody is convinced education is important, and then that's why you are here. If you are here and you don't think education is not important, then that's, you have very philosophical questions why you are here. Because you are convinced, you think education is important, you are here, right? So the question is not education, if the education is important or not important. It is important. But the big picture question is how education contributes to the economy. And then these are the these are the questions policymakers are facing. In Indonesia, statistics show, or the evidence shows, there is a weak link between education, result, and productivity. Indonesian productivity is not as high as people wish to. So this is one of the questions we want to deal with, how Indonesia education can be linked to productivity gains. So this is a kind of like a big figure. Another issue is access to education, as the initial questions shows inequality for among the people who have access to education. So the next slide, Indonesia implemented impressive arrays of education reform, and then the biggest of all is 2009, 20% of budget will be used on education. So I myself do not know any other countries to commit certain percentage of the budget into education. Vietnam. Okay, so Vietnam is another country, but then very few countries actually do this. And then this is quite a commitment, to say the least. And then because of this, the gross enrollment rate, not only for the primary and secondary, but tertiary, the college level education gross enrollment rate is increasing. And then this shows more and more the younger generation Indonesians have access to education. So this is a good news. Then, next slide. If you compare to, for example, the pupil-teacher ratio for primary schools, pupil-teacher ratio secondary schools, it is a good figure. There's one teacher only look at 16, 15 students. So this is better figures compared to other Southeast Asian peers. And then also the literacy rate is high and so forth. So we see a good indicators, the result of education supply. But next slide. If you see productivity gains, the Indonesia is still lacks compared to some other countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and so forth. And then there's still a gap. The education supply or the government reforms are not necessarily linked to the productivity. And 2012, McKinsey Global Institute, this is a little bit old figure, but then if you want to reach to 7% economic growth, that time that is a kind of target, then how much productivity gains Indonesia need to have. And then compared to the 2000 to 2010 productivity gains, Indonesia needs 60% more productivity gains in order to reach to 7.0% economic growth. Right now, economic growth is a little bit lower, somewhere around the 5%, but even still, this figure highlights the importance of the productivity gains. And people know productivity gains only comes from the education and skill training. Then, next slide shows PISA result. And the PISA result is the OECD supported test across all the different countries for the similar level students. And then unfortunately, Indonesia comes to a lower rank compared to many other countries in the data. And science, math, reading, it has the lower score. Then next slide, this is kind of the answer for the first question. So the active, economically active population, which basically in the labor market, only 9% has the university degree. The vast majority is primary education or less, or the junior high school, and then that consists of 59%. And then among 38% primary school education or less, among those, 50% is engaged in agriculture. So agriculture is the source of the labor supply, low productive labor supply. And then among 38% of less than primary school, 19% engaged to trade, restaurants, hotels. Those are also low productive service sector. And then by Edimon's presentation, we saw like there's a mega city, and in peripheral there's a lot of small cities. And then those small cities, there are many low productive service sectors. And then many people coming from the rural areas, or the people, workers with less education, tend to engage in those low-level productive service sectors. And then the next slide, and then one of our co-authors, M.IDEC, studied the mismatch of your skill and also the occupation you have. And then this orange bar at the bottom, it's a total occupation mismatch, and then nearly 50%. It depends, the figure varies how to estimate the mismatch, but then more than 50% of workers are in the wrong workplace based on the skill sets they get. So this is also another issue. Education is important, and then coming to education, the institute is important. But the more important issue is the skill transfer happens at the education level. And then just coming to a school and then go to a labor market will not necessarily increase the productivity. Actually, you have to get the skills at the place you study. So we came up with a number of policy recommendations. These are prepared for policymakers, so it's not necessarily for you to go through one by one. But then some of the point we want to highlight is Indonesia spent lots of money, the tax money, on the education institutions. This is commendable, this is great, but still, how we spend the money. For example, there's a low-income student. How do we help those low-income students? Those are the things we have to think about. The use of money, how transparent the money worked. And also the government policy making needs to be streamlined. There's a bureaucracy. And then there's many ministries and agencies involved in the policy making. Those need to be simplified. And also the teacher, the supply of education need to be managed. How to certify the teachers, how to monitor, manage the education level. Those are the issues we propose. Next slide, and the next slide. So we just summarize key messages, and the first one is beyond quantity, quality of education and vocational training matters for improved productivity. So those kind of highlights this chapter. Quality matters, not the quantity. Indonesia seems to be doing great for quantity, and then lots of education is provided. But still, inequality of access to the education exists, and also the education, the quantity supplied education is not linked to the productivity gains. Then the second point, innovation becomes more important for productivity growth. So this, the new technologies come in, and then innovation is more important. The internet will affect our life. Artificial intelligence will change the labor market. And then we are arguing in this chapter, the higher education, R&Ds are more and more important. And then those new innovations, new technologies, those will make it will be a game changer for the labor market. Then, lastly, this is for the policymakers. Policy planning and decision making should be informed by evidence. Some participants yesterday's book launch said, does the government do any cost-benefit analysis for education expenditure? So, government spent $1 million, for example, then is that the benefit is getting back for this investment? Education is an investment, and then investment needs to be reviewed, and then investment needs to be recovered by the productivity gains, and then those should be studied by the evidence and data. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kiyoshi Taniguchi. The point is presented by Edimon and Prof. Kiyoshi Taniguchi is about this one, the key message is about the innovation. That's very important. It is not only productivity and efficiency, but now the keyword is about innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, which is more important now to provide the graduates with the equipment which is suitable for the market. Okay, thank you very much, both of the presenters, all of the presenters. And now it is time for the discussion. There's changing seaters now. Terima kasih. And we are having three prominent persons. The first is Professor Hanie Kusnanto. Mari silakan Pak. Silakan Professor Hanie Kusnanto, M.D. Is a professor of public health, Faculty of Medicine, Public Health and Nursing, Universitas Gajah Mada. Education is Doctor of Public Health from Yale University, United States of America. Previous work experience as the Director of the Environmental Studies Center, Universitas Gajah Mada. He's going to discuss about the presentation on Edhie based on the health of the labor in order to improve the productivity, something like that. The second is Dr. Evita, Hanie Pangaribowo, Ph.D. Silakan. She is a lecturer and researcher at Department of Environmental Geography, Master of International Development of Economics, Australian National University, like Pak Chris Mane, and Ph.D. from Universitas Bonn, Universitas Bonn. And ongoing research is about agriculture, water, sanitation, hygiene, access, and intra-household resources and disaster management in Indonesia, and also something about raskin. And he's from our faculty, right? S1-nya dari sini, dari FPPTF, jadi keluarga sendiri. And last but not least, it will be the first discussion is Dr. Hanie Sulistyaningrum. Mari silakan Bu Hanie. Pak Hari sama Bu Evita, nanti Bu Hanie duluan karena mau ada acara. He is a very important person at our faculty. He is a secretary of the Department of Economics, Faculty of Economics, Universitas Gajah Mada, and Education for the M.A. from Georgia State University and Ph.D. from Lancaster University. Research interest is in labor economics and economics of education and public economics. I think each of the discussion will have a presentation for 10 until 15 minutes. Started mohon izin Pak Hari sama Bu Evita, Bu Hanie dulu. Bu Hanie silahkan, time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Edhie, as a moderator. First, maybe my comment, my discussion is for Pak Chris Manning. It is related with the analysis of supply and demand analysis. I was just wondering, it would be better if we can add some more prediction or estimation about the skills that labor market needs in the short run and in the long runs. So in the labor economics, there is like cobweb model. Okay. In this cobweb model, there is an analysis of labor market equilibrium. Assume that market adjusts instantaneously to shift in either supply or demand curve. So that wages and employment change from the old equilibrium level to the new equilibrium ones. Many labor markets, however, do not adjust so quickly in this case. And underlying supply and demand curve, there is some evidence, for instance, especially for the job that need a very high skill, like a doctor or engineers here. It is a very professional job and exhibits systematic periods of booms and busts that dispute the nation of labor market competitions. So, for example, for the case of engineers or doctors, market for engineers graduate, it has long been recognized that the market for engineers fluctuates regularly. So, between periods, certain periods, maybe there is an excess demand of engineers, and for the certain periods, maybe there is excess supply of engineers. Okay. And as a result, there is like business cycles. Sometimes we reach a peak and then we reach the bottom of the level supply and demand of the engineers. And it will, I think, influence the graduate from the senior high school to influence the decision whether the student will going to the engineer faculty or not, because the student maybe will make sure whether when she or he has finished or graduate from the faculty of engineering, at that time, is there any other kind of new job that can hire him or her. This is especially for the type of the classical job. I mentioned classical job because engineer doctor is like when we were a kid, then there is a question, what are you want to be when we are in the adult levels. I was just wondering if we can predict in the long run and in the short run. Is there any statistic from the BPS that provided data? This is the number of doctors in Indonesia from year to year, this number of engineers and so on. So we can see during the next 5 years, the need of doctor will be high compared to recently, for instance. Then maybe the student from the senior high school then want to decide to go to the medical faculty, for instance. And the other is about, it is also important if we talk about the job creation, is the job creation dominated from the small business, right? Especially from the small and medium maybe enterprises. We just finished a survey and then we found that there is a lot of type of job that it is beyond our imagination, that this person can offer this kind of job and then this person is survive instead of just follow the civil servant kind of the job. So this is maybe very important as well to include it in the discussion about the job creation, because we talk about the job quality in the future from the type of business, small business that is possible for the young generation to develop in the futures. So maybe you already mentioned about the digital economy, and we can maybe give some examples or maybe data. This is the business of the online shopping. This is for the, maybe we already know well about the online Gojek, something like that, that we can also mention. And from the side of Edimon, this is related with the allocation hours of work for the for across sectoral, so like in the agriculture, industry, and manufacture, something like that. How many hours that person wants to offer for agriculture sectors? In my mind, for the people who work for the agriculture, maybe just need months to focusing on the land processing, and then while they're waiting for the harvest, then they will maybe do nothing, something like that. Maybe we can also over complement a job that the person can do while waiting for the harvest. And it is also maybe very good if we can provide the number of hours of work, maybe per week by sectoral, so we can see from the agriculture there is on a few hours compared to maybe industrial sector, manufacturing sector, and so on. And from the side of the educational economics, I have seen in the ADB books, and there is earning regression using the Minserian equation. Excuse me. And it just the measurement for the variable is using the years of education. It means that we are not make a distinguish between the formal education and the vocational educations. In Indonesian case, we face like divided demographics, like the productive people is over than unproductive ones. So and then when we see the pattern of the what we call school participation rate in Indonesia, in the university participation rate is still the lowest one compared to the maybe primary school or junior high school. It's just like President Jokowi mentioned in the year 2016, early year 2016, if I'm not mistaken. President Jokowi wants to add some more vocational school, maybe to give a better skill for the people who cannot reach the university level. Because if we only go to the maybe general school compared to the vocational school, when they graduate and then they're looking for a job, it is maybe very difficult to find the suitable job. So maybe it is better as well to estimate from the side of vocational school by how much the wage will increase, or is there any difference significantly between the person who goes to the public vocational school or private vocational school, general vocational school, compared to the people who just go to the public general school. What I mean is like the SMA, sekolah menengah atas biasa. It is from the side of the education. So in the BPS, they provided data. It's recently there is around 11,000 school for the vocational school. So maybe we can increase some more, or we can maybe revisit the curriculum for the vocational school, because maybe it is very important for the case of Indonesia when we have a very populous country in compared to other countries. The other thing that is important is not only the formal education that is important to create a better quality job, but also the soft skill that we should provide it in the educations. So maybe there is any short discussion about what kind of the soft skill that industry already need, like maybe communication skill, negotiation skill, teamwork skill, and so on, that we can provide it to the readers. And the last one is about the wage structure, because this is related with the wage inequality, and of course this condition will influence the maybe the number of the poverty in Indonesia. In the recent years, there is a wage gap among education group, among experience group, and also among the age group, and also within demographic. I mean here, the same person, the same age, the same education level, but it can be have a different level of wages. So it is maybe we can try to find the data. If we go to this kind of job, then approximately maybe we can earn like this rupiahs per month or per annum, if we want to say it per annum. I think from me that's all, Pak Edhie. Maybe we can move to another discussion. Thank you.
And the second, I think professors would like to inspire us. What would be the healthy labor workers who create some innovation or something like that? Silakan Pak.
Terima kasih Pak. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this seminar or launching of ADB book. I think if I may comment on the book, I think it's very commendable, very comprehensive, and raising my awareness about the shortcomings of labor productivity and maybe also my productivity. However, for me it's rather difficult to read because a lot of quantitative, well, I learned statistics, but different quantification of labor market, and of course it's labor economics, which I'm not familiar. But I remember in 1974, many of you have not been born, an article by Dr. Kusnanto entitled "Marriage and Divorce in Mojolama" with Pak Masri Singalinggon. I enjoyed reading that article when I was, at the time I was an undergraduate in medical school, and I saw a lot of human face in the article. And I remember in 2001 I went to Harvard University after the Asian financial crisis, and I had to write I wrote a paper about the impact of the crisis, Indonesian crisis, to nutritional status of children. And a lot of discussion about human face were raised by many people at the time. Structural adjustment with human face, or labor transformation with human face. And I think I need to read more features, human face features in the book. I expected more, so that for me it become more interesting. Okay, next slide. Please allow me to stand up. If I could oversimplify, the messages in the book is that we are advised to move from rural labor market in rural areas into urban areas because we consider that agricultural employment is not as productive as surface employment or manufacturer employment, because we consider that in rural areas the labor market just could be filled by unskilled older workers, and we see that in rural areas lower standard of living are common, less access to health and other services, and many different kind of disadvantages in rural areas. And we want to move out from these conditions into better situations. Surface-led employment in urban areas, agglomeration without any urban sprawl, more productive labor, better access to social services, and so on and so forth. And from the health perspectives, I think we would move. Now the condition in rural areas that we are exposed to indoor air pollution, causing pneumonia in children, tuberculosis, into urban areas which we don't have indoor air pollution, but we have environmental degradation with a lot of its own problems. So we have to consider that if we move to urban areas. And we will now in rural areas we have more undernourished people, especially children. However, in urban areas now we have double burden of malnutrition, undernutrition and overnutrition, obesity more in urban areas. But President Jokowi talked about stunting among Indonesian people is about 30%, 40% and more in rural areas. So stunting is a factor of productivity, labor productivity. And it's very difficult to overcome because the cause of stunting is intergenerational. So I am short now because my mother is short, although my father is tall, but I'm so unfortunate because I'm short. My brother is much taller, 15 centimeters above me, because my father is tall. But overall, I suffer from stunting because I'm the oldest person. But Ginting is, I think, 2 meters, yeah. So, I think he would have played in NBA and National Basket Association in the United States. Okay. And although it's getting less and less, but we still see now knowledge and technology divide among urban and rural and urban areas. But I have a friend in Sleman, uneducated but very talented. He is very creative. He produces logos for international companies and thousands of offering to make logos. And he earned. There are a lot of competitions, and he earned about $200 every time he wins the competition to produce logos. So it's already in rural areas in Sleman, a creative job using digital technology. So it's he sent his samples of pictures, logos through the internet, and he got payment from PayPal. So it's already there, even in rural areas. And I think it's getting more and more. So the intervention proposed in the book, I think, improve educational outcomes, fitness to quality jobs, better social security, enhance creativity and innovation in the workplace. I think those are very ideal situation. However, specifically about health, next slide. This is my last slide. I would like to cite, well, this is a paper by Hala, 2014. I tried to modify their concepts based on Gary Becker, a Nobel laureate in economics. His theory about household production function. So if you see this, the capital, our capital will depreciate, but we need capital, including labor, to produce income, to produce profit. And then we use the income for consumption. So if our capital now depreciates, including human, so then it will affect their health stock. If I could learn from the household production of health. But increasing health stock will delay or will compensate for depreciation of capital. And we always invest on capital because capital is needed for producing income. And we use the income to produce health stock. We consume our income to produce health stock and to mitigate or to prevent or to minimize depreciation. So my role now, I'm the head of the College of Family Physicians. Last year I went to Flinders, Adelaide, to learn about the family general practice there, family medicine, and also rural medicine, because the president of WONCA, World Association of Family Medicine, Michael Gates, is from Flinders, and now he is in Canada, but originally he is a professor of Flinders. And we try to improve health stocks in rural areas among poor people, among those disadvantaged people. But what happened in Indonesia that I am become the common enemy of Indonesian Association, Indonesian Medical Association, especially the specialists, because if we consider that general practice as a specialist, then a lot of their bread and butter would be consumed, let's say, would be taken by us as a specialist in general practice. So Gajah Mada University will lead the production of general practice as specialists, although we are opposed by Indonesian Medical Association. But President Jokowi supported us, and the three branches of government, legislatives, executives, and judicative, also behind us. So we have a legal basis to produce general practice as a specialist. And because our aims is to improve health stock in rural areas and in those who live in disadvantaged areas, because it also directly improves the human capital. So, and then will improve the production, the competitive advantages of our labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hanie. I think the last one, discussion, is to Evita, or Islam.
Terima kasih Kak Edie. Thank you for inviting me and for giving me opportunity to be a discussant in this important seminar. I have some comments on the book itself, and it might be overlapping with previous discussion, particularly Ibu Hanie. But my first impressions on the book is that the book is very comprehensive and very insightful because it discusses the issues of labor market in Indonesia and also labor policies and institutions and how labor policy and institution interplay to affect labor productivity. But on the other hand, the book also discusses the other issue behind the labor market, such as population dynamics and population mobility, which giving us how these labor markets behave like this situation. So I'm not going to address one by one for each presenters, but I'm giving more broader comments, and Pak Kiyoshi, Pak Chris, and Pak Edimon might respond on that. And I have 4 points to make as a discussion, so I'm very much impressed with the book, but this is my responsibility to give some comments and notes on the book. So I have 4 main comments. The first one is on the importance of regional disaggregation. It's not because I'm a geographer by profession, but particularly it's important to really look at the regional diversification, particularly when we look at the demographic transition, where Pak Chris already mentioned earlier on the demographic bonus or demographic dividends that Indonesia will enjoy until 2035, but this figure might be different across provinces. And some provinces has enjoyed earlier, like DKI Jakarta, DIY, the demographic dividends has finished for some provinces like DKI. I might mention, and you can also see from the slides that some areas, the rich areas, which is the center of labor market in Indonesia, like DKI Jakarta, Yogyakarta, East Java, Central Java, has completed the demographic dividends. On the other hand, there are some provinces that might not enjoy until 2035, like several provinces in West Sumatra and other provinces in the eastern part of Indonesia. And these variations have some consequences on the labor market situations and need different policies, because the demographic dividend is not instant products, but it's a longer consequences from various phenomena like the population mobility, fertility, decision, family planning, mortality, health, and other aspects. So in this case, looking at demographic bonus at the national level might masking the variation at the lower level, particularly at the regional level. And when we look at several provinces like West Sumatra, it's very much attached with the tradition of the population mobility, which we call merantau, where most of the younger people, they go to Java and to other parts of Sumatra to make a living, to get a job outside their home provinces. So this might affect also the policy on population mobility, labor markets, and other issues. So again, I would like to make some point here that the regional disaggregation is very much important. This is also related to the education, as Pak Kiyoshi also mentioned about education quality. There are some figures that presents, if you have a chance for students, for example, if you have a chance to look at the book, the PISA score of Indonesia is very, very much low compared to other countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. For example, Singapore is ranked 1, and Indonesia is very much behind to those neighboring countries. And these figures also might be more worsened if we look at the provincial level, where the educational quality is very much different across region in Indonesia. And then it's also mentioned that soft skill is important, not only hard skill, the education itself, but also soft skill is important, and somehow this is less touched in the education system of Indonesia, though some education institution already put this as emphasized and make into the systems, but somehow it's very different across regions. The third point, the second point that I'm going to also make here is about the social policy and labor markets. There is a section that mentioned in the book how the wage in Indonesia is somehow affected by the global financial crisis. And it's also affect the earnings of Indonesian workers. And this also needs some support from the government in terms of social protection. And what we can learn from Latin America, for example, where the countries in Latin America, they put the social protection system together in the labor market. So it will go in tandem, how the government will support the workers and how they also get some protection. Because somehow, on the other hand, when we discuss about the agricultural labor market or agricultural workers in rural areas which are very much attached to poverty, then social protection is needed, but somehow it will respond differently across people or across different workers with different labor skills. Because social protection might, on the other hand, also reduce the labor supply from the poor people, but they still need it. And we can learn from the Latin America case how they go in tandem with the social protection and labor markets attached together. And the third point is on the point on digital technologies, and I see that the digital technologies is less touched in the books and not really combined and elaborate with other aspects like gender and education, for example, as it's pretty much mentioned that skills is needed, vocational training is needed, but somehow how these trainings and another education will be much beneficial for other people when the digital technologies is also involved. There are various trainings and other education which use the online platforms such as the MOOCs systems, the mobile open online education courses, which over worldwide that might be a solution to get a cheap and effective trainings for laborers. And in this case also how the gender is related to digital technologies. In various countries, particularly in developed countries, the digital technologies pretty much play a role in increasing the female labor force participations that has been stressed by Chris Manning earlier, that the female labor force participation is remain stagnant in Indonesia. So there might be a chance that women will be much more involved in the labor market through the digital technologies. And my last point is that I'm going to make notes that the micro evidence is needed. Really, more of the discussion on the books is based on the macro evidence and macroeconomic profile of Indonesia. There are some micro evidence in chapter 4, in chapter 5, if I'm not mistaken, on the structural transformations and the labor productivity, but somehow the quality jobs and who is actually go into the more better works is needed through micro evidence and more analysis, like who is actually got higher upper jobs level, what is the social status behind, who is the parents, and all of this need more microeconomic evidence which use more micro data. And also the studies on decent works and life satisfaction is also important, and this can be supported and examined through microdata that might be used through Sakernas, Susenas, and other household surveys that might be provide more insights to design more relevant policies on the labor markets. I think that's all my points. Thank you very much, Pak Edhie.
Okay, thank you very much for the discussion. I cannot make a summary for the presentation today, but it is about the ecosystem of the laborers to make them more productive, and it should be more innovative, and the creativity has to exist in something like that. Short run, long run, vocational, skill, market, microstructures, and also labor in the urban area, in the village, or something like that. But it is time now for question and answer, and I would like to ask your permission to exchange the sitters one more. Give more applause to the discussion. And we are inviting the presenter Bu Hanie. Terima kasih. Terima kasih Pak Ahli. It's time for you to have the question. 1, 2, 3.
My name is Edhie. I'm student of Magister Management of UGM, and currently I also work for Ministry of Finance. As we know that Indonesia is currently blessed with demographic bonus, as around a half of population is below 30 years of age, and I think this situation gives us not only advantages but also disadvantages, because in 2040 the elderly people will increase significantly, and in my opinion the greatest risk of aging population is fiscal risk, because in the future our government have to allocate a large portion of our budget to support these elderly people. And my question is, what's your advice to our government to address this problem, especially in our pension system? Because I think if we are not ready for the 2040, this demographic bonus can turn to demographic disaster. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Second question.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Edhie. I am also from Magister Management UGM. I want to answer to Mr. Chris Manning. In my opinion, demographic dividend is like a double-edged sword. It can be a good opportunity for our country. On the other hand, it can cause a serious problem. Based on your presentation, you gave a policy recommendation that to cope with the problem, the government should slow fertility and population growth. And my question is, if the policy is failed and Indonesia face the problem, face the demographic dividend problem, what should we or government do to maximize the opportunity of demographic dividend, or to reduce the negative impact of demographic dividend? Thank you very much.
Okay, terima kasih Haji. You are the last one.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kiyoshi and I am from undergraduate of Economics department. My question is, there is one topic that didn't get touched very well, but I think there is an interesting topic to be discussed. This about classification. As we know, Java is only a small fraction of Indonesia, but in Java there live more than half of the population in Indonesia. Do you think and we also think about the urbanization and about the divided labor market? Is urbanization, do we need to consider transmigration to other islands of Indonesia to help to overcome the challenge of the future labor market? Thank you.
Okay, terima kasih. And I think it is time for the presenters from Edimon to answer the question as well as to give the comments of the discussion. Silakan Pak Edimon.
Thank you very much. First of all, before we forget, the book as of yesterday are available for free in the internet, in the ADB website. So you can have an electronic copy for free from the internet. Yes, is correct? I think you can have it for free. I think that's usually the tradition in ADB. All of our publication, as long as it is e-file, it is for free. On the comment, let me start with the comment from Hanie. I think you mentioned about human faith. I think as I said to you earlier, to all of you, we economists often like to talk about numbers, output, and so on. Actually, talking about employment is already start about people. But maybe in the presentation we still talk about people, not their face. Yeah. So in a way, I think I agree with you. I think development is about people. I think by having this book, actually, we want to look at the people side of Indonesia, not only about output side, but about people side. Because eventually, the beneficiary of development actually has to be people. Maybe we haven't really conveyed it in a micro manner as you mentioned, but I think the idea was actually to put the people side of development in there. That's actually the very idea of the book. Of course, as we said before, there's many problems. In Indonesia, employment issues are by no means very simple. It's very complex. You also mentioned that regional, if you regionalize it, it's going to be different. The solution is going to be different. We agree completely. Eastern and West Indonesia, Java is unique case in terms of problems. Urbanization is problem of Java mainly. It happened in Eastern Indonesia, Ujung Pandang and so on. But this is more of Java. And this also answers your question. When we talk about urbanization, it's kind of already like transmigration, right? I think it's no longer transmigration, engineered during Suharto time, where people are moving from Java to Sumatra and so on, to less dense island. But now it is more of going to opportunity. I think this is kind of a transmigration nowadays that happen. It's no longer about going to the place where there's no opportunity. But I think looking beyond, looking forward, I guess, as I said before, urbanization needs to be planned much better. Need to be anticipated. Need to happen by plan. Nowadays, if we want to expand productive job in manufacturing and so on, and we want to industrialize part of the economy, that should be also part of urbanization plan. That may involve transmigration. Even may not be Java to Sumatra, could be Java to Java, for example. Nowadays, maybe there are already a number of places designated by the president to develop for manufacturing and so on. That will involve some transmigration, movement of people, and migration, and so on. I think that is happening, although it's no longer in the scale that was happening during Suharto time. I think another thing that I was intrigued by is actually your point on female participation and the impact of technology. I agree. I think with technology, I think female labor market may become more flexible. I think some of the constraints for them to engage in the labor market may be reduced. I think you can increase your productivity from home, and in fact, even in the formal labor market these days, you are actually encouraged to work from home because that actually is found to be improving productivity. So I think I agree with that. I think there will be some change involved in female participation and in fact maybe pay as well. That's all I have. Let me give it to Kiyoshi.
I just want to touch on the vocational training section. In our chapter, even though there's no vocational training touched in the presentation, but in the book there's a section for the vocational training. And this is a new issue. It is true, it is important for students who have decided not to go to university but wants to have a skill training, they will choose the vocational training. But it is a reality, vocational training is very, very expensive. And train practical skills for people just comes with the price. And then it cannot be the public vocational training is the solution, because tax money is limited, and then the resource cannot be used only for the vocational training. Then there are mushroom of private vocational training schools coming out, and then the issue here is, number one, the price is high, the tuition is high, it's very expensive. Number two, the quality varies, and then there are good private vocational training schools there, but then also there's a very low quality vocational training schools too. So this is a new emerging issues, and then this is something like the government has to come up with how much policy support for those the vocational training. So this is just my reaction.
Thank you very much. Maybe first about the demographic bonus, yeah, and that was by Hanie, I think by Hanie, is that right? And Edhie asked about those questions. I think the really fundamental issue is that as long as the growth of the working age population and the labour force is fast, it's very hard to place much attention to quality. I think Kiyoshi has been talking about the issues of quality in the education system, but if the enrollments are increasing by 5%, 6% per annum, then the issues are really about about quantity. The quantity issues dominate. So you can never really get down to the quality issues that are really fundamental to raising productivity. So that's the advantage of going beyond the demographic bonus period to a period of more stable population and labour force growth, where the country then invests in the quality of its population. And Indonesia has enough time to do that, I think. You still have about 15, 20 years, yeah, when the older age population is not going to dominate. So as long as planning is undertaken early enough, then that's I think that's that can be achieved. So I hope that answers the issue of the demographic bonus. Very briefly on a couple of other questions. Edhie asked about manpower, really about manpower planning. In general, years ago when I was still young and writing about marriage and other topics, demographic topics, manpower planning was a big issue, and a lot of countries were planning, how many engineers do we need in the next 20 years, how many doctors, but over time people began to realize the predictions that they made had very little to do with reality. It was very hard to plan. The economy changes, there's a global crisis, there's a national crisis, structure of production changes. So there's much more emphasis now on the rate of return from particular investments in human capital, and that's that sort of analysis rather than manpower planning in the long term. Second, also raised by Hanie, but also in addition, I think by Evita, about the digital economy and female engagement. I agree with Edimon. I think there's one of the great opportunities to improve the participation of female and the productivity is through extending digital skills for females in both urban and rural areas, and of course in the home. Yeah, I mean they can work from the home. The real challenge is that many of these women are still relatively less educated. Secondary school, lowest SMP or SMR, many of them do not have the access to these skills at present. So a big challenge is really to extend the training to those households. So that was, but actually I'm very optimistic that the real opportunity of the digital economy is the small scale economy. I mean, people are very worried about robots, you know, in textiles and so on. That's true. But then Indonesia is basically a small enterprise-based economy. And there are so many opportunities if people can be brought into these systems, e-commerce, e-transport, the communications that come through the internet and the digital economy. So I'm optimistic actually about that one. And finally, just to go Evita on the regional issues, we didn't look at those issues. There were just too much to do, yeah? But a follow-up is certainly to look at some of the issues we've looked at a regional level. We did look at just the global situation, say, for Java versus outer islands and so on. And you're quite right. I mean, Java has actually gone through the demographic bonus already, if you look at the figures. But then, of course, we have to remember Java is part of Indonesia, so there's still younger people coming into Jakarta or Jogja or from Sumatra and other places. So some parts are experiencing those changes very fast, but it is a national labour market that tends to balance out those effects. So that's all I think from me, Pak. Terima kasih. I answered the main question.
Professor. I think there's one more session, I think, for the closing session of question and answer. One, two, one more. Woman. One more. Wajib laki-laki. Satu perempuan.
My name is Ranjit from MSc UGM Masters. I want to ask Professor Taniguchi about regarding the quality of education in Indonesia. You say that the productivity of the university graduate in Indonesia is low, and I want to ask. First, I have to say that labor economics is not my forte. I'm really focusing on monetary economics, but the problem of the quality of education intrigues me. So I want to ask that: do you have figures or data about the rate of degradation of skills regarding of university graduate? Because I noticed in here, people lose their age very quickly after they graduate. I mean, just a half year after they graduate, and they just forget many things they have studied here. Do you have any, figure or statistic regarding that? Because, sorry to say, but the fact is, many people attend university just because they want to have a degree to be able to work. They don't really need the knowledge, and the knowledge that they don't need, they don't love, wears off very quickly. Is there any statistics for that? Just that. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Fauzan, and I would like to ask regarding the availability of jobs in the future, because as we all know today that the fourth industrial revolution means that a lot of jobs will be replaced by robots or automation of process. There is a data from an in-depth research body that is more investment in Indonesia, but foreign investment and domestic investment is going to service sector with little to no job creation, especially for low-skilled job creation, while the manufacturing is getting lower investment every day. Which means that in the future there will be two kinds of jobs. There is the top jobs, which pays well but requires high skill education, and low jobs with low pays, with little requirement for jobs. And those jobs, those high-paying jobs, will be created on the urban sector, while leaving those on the rural and agricultural sector. Does this mean that there will be some kind of disruption about this phenomenon in the future, probably 10 or 20 years into the future? And is there any way to solve it, such as by universal basic income or any interest in education quality, especially vocational and academic in university? Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation, Pak Edhie. Okay, my name is Salim Fauzan. I graduated from Economics Department last year. I just want to discuss about vocational school deeply. In my experience, I see some of my friends that have joined vocational school or D3. We can call it in Indonesia D3. But after they graduate from D3, they are prepared to continue. Maybe we can call it as class extensive, something like that. So, is there any kind of incentive to make some student who has joined vocational school to stay in vocational level and to enhance the vocational level in Indonesia? Thank you.
Hanya itu pertanyaannya, sorry.
Yes, enough, sir.
Okay. Okay. Start for the answers.
Yeah, let me start from here. I think let me answer Fauzan's questions with questions. You know, I think let me share with you the joke that was shared by Hairul Tanjung when we launched the book. Basically, he was highlighting some of the points that he made that, you know, down the line there will be a lot of change. Include, you know, the use of robots. Your girlfriend in the future may be robots. That's for example, you know. Why? There are some positive advantages of robots. We will never get angry. Okay. If you don't like them, you can replace. And so on. I think, but the bottom line is this. I think your worry is that there will be jobs on the top, very little on the middle, and there are many on the bottom. So I think that is something that I think we all still waiting, and the signal is not yet there, especially in ASEAN. Adoption of these things are not very fast. But the bottom line is this. I think, as Pak Chris was saying, we see more positive rather than negative of this industry 4.0, digital economy and so on. Why? Because, you know, we will not be able to get rid of people. We will have to work with people. We will have to retrain them. But, you know, at the same time, okay, if you talk about too long, like long in the future, one of policy recommendation of Pak Chris before was actually family planning it to continue. So, will industry 4.0 affect the family planning? Okay, let's see. You know? But I think the bottom line is that, you know, we think that there's a risk, but it will have more positive than negative on that point. Yeah.
I just want to touch on the first question, Tony, that's your name. The ask the inequality of education to the productivity. Actually, we do not have, productivity is an average figure. We do not have any individual productivity figures, but then it's taken as average. And then, so it is very difficult to measure, like two persons attend the college and then one person become more productive than other student. So how we can measure, so it's a measurement issues and so forth, but then we usually do not measure in a very segmented matter. And then another issue you raise is also the degradation of skills and knowledge. Over time, people became forgetful, and then people become maybe moving slow, so maybe the productivity might go down. But the same argument, if somebody keeps working the same thing, you become more efficient, and then you have more knowledge and experience that will enhance the productivity. So it goes back to individual skills. So some people get more productive as you work longer, or some people maybe repetitive work and then become less productive. So I guess your questions, we do not have the data, but then my thinking is it's very difficult to say. It's based on the each individual issues. And then the next issue of I just want to touch on this robot issue. I'm optimistic on this robot issue. Many people say like, oh, the robots will be replaced by the human being will be replaced by the robots, and then we'll lose the job. But then I read the article, like if you think of any jobs 100 years ago, and then do we still have those jobs? No, because after 100 years, 1 century, many things change. There's no internet 100 years ago. So there are computer programmers today. It's not replaced by someone else. Some other people did something else, became a computer programmer. So this is like a gradual change over the time, and then the people start to do new things, and then it's not necessarily suddenly replaced by robots. So I'm more optimistic, and then this Industry 4.0 is just normal gradual change of our daily life. It will not happen like next day. It will happen gradually next 30 years. So for me, it's our life gets better with internet and digital revolution, but then I'm optimistic on this change.
Okay, thank you very much. If I could make just one comment also on automation, and my feeling is this: Industry 4.0, the perspectives on it tend to be engineering perspectives. They're not economic perspectives. People don't look at what are the prices of labour and capital ultimately involved in this technological change. Most of the discussion is about automation that's occurring in developed countries, and it's occurring because of the changes in relative prices. Wages are going up very fast in most of the developed countries, or are very high, and so automation is a response to that. That's not happening in Indonesia. Indonesian wages are about 1/10 of real wages of the wages in many of these other countries. So the pressure for automation is not nearly as strong. And I would like to see more economic analysis of these issues, and I think you are the people to do that, to talk to the engineers and say, hey, this isn't just a technical issue. This has got something to do with economics, with the relative prices of labour and capital. So I'd like to see more discussion of those issues. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much for all the presentation from the presenters. But it is not yet closed. There is one more session, which is the closing remarks. One most important sentences from each of the presenters related to the Edhie book launching called Indonesia Enhancing Productivity to the Quality Job. For each of the presenters, we would like to have one last closing remarks, one sentence only. What is the most important of this book, according to yourself, in one sentence or two sentences? Chris first.
Should I have this? I guess the most important thing is we shouldn't look too far ahead. The real economy is actually you all know it, what the real economy is if you go to Bantul, if you go to Gunung Kidul, if you go to Kulon Progo, the small-scale industries, the agriculture. That's Indonesia's real economy. The digital economy is in the cities, and the big issue is how to meet those two. But the real economy will continue to influence what's happening in Indonesia for a very long time to come.
Thank you very much, Marcus. That's 10 sentences. 2 at the maximum. 2 sentences. What is the most important things from your book?
I think the most important thing about the book is, at the end of the day, development is about people. Okay, what the book is telling you, this is the problem of people side of the economy now, and we have to focus on it more informally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Edimon. Last one. our senior researcher from
Maybe I just one word, not even a sentence. Innovation. Innovation is the key for Indonesia to be competitive.
Okay, thank you very much. And give for all applause. I think we are having a valuable, knowledge and inspiration that is brought by the three presenters from the headquarters of ADB, which is very valuable for our understanding of what the labor markets look like in Indonesia and what it will be. And I think we can add more values to our education or our labor market. But one more example that I would like to keep it for the closing remarks from the side of moderators is the one which is conducted by who we call it Mr. Kabir, Mrs. Kabir. He is graduated from Santa Clara University, and he brought the technology from the rural area to the woman. The digital divided in Bangladesh at the time is something like the one which is improved very well. And he brought the technology to the rural area based on her experience in Silicon Valley. He had a level of education as Master of Business Administration, and he was the head of the Microsoft, head of the Dell, and head of the one more prominent companies, technological companies, and he served the people in the rural area and improved the opportunity and also the inspiration. Only the first step to open the business type, business-like information technology, to open mind the movement in the rural area, and finally it is regarded by UN as the best example to improve the quality of the labor in Bangladesh. And we can have more and more examples to improve the productivity of the labor and through the quality job later on. I think it is time to close, and I would like you to have an applause for the presenter. And thank you very much to come to our faculty. Edimon, Pams, go back to the LC, not MC, ladies of ceremony.